All right, hi. We're here to talk today about soldering, which is a process of putting metal together. We will be putting together wires, and those wires will be made of copper. And we will be using a tin-based material, not a lead-based material, which melts at a lower temperature, and that will adhere to the copper wires, and it will make them make a very strong and secure connection between them. I want to introduce you, before we get to the soldering itself, I want to introduce you to the tools that we will be using in the process of soldering. And probably the most important piece will be the goggles or safety glasses that you will be wearing when you are soldering. So everybody will be required to wear safety glasses. The soldering iron is hot. This is the soldering iron, and in conjunction with the soldering iron we have a damp sponge, and we have a ball of bronze wool. And these are used for cleaning, and I'll explain that in a moment. We have wire strippers, we have needle nose pliers, and we have wire cutters. We also have something called a third hand. The third hand is a device that will allow us to hold things so that they won't move. This would be either a switch or a wire, and we will go through that process of seeing all of those steps as we move forward. So the first and probably most important thing you need to know about soldering is that the soldering iron itself needs to be kept very, very clean. And if we don't keep it clean, the soldering process just simply will not work. So you're going to see me take the soldering iron, and I'm holding it like a pencil, and I'm going to wipe sort of vigorously on the sponge. I'm wiping it, I'm not pausing there, I'm wiping it. And then I'm going to sort of poke this steel, or this is actually bronze wool, and you'll see that I have a very shiny tip. My soldering iron is now tinned, and if I apply solder to that, you're going to see some smoke. And the smoke is the result of a flux that's in the interior of it's actually a core inside this tin wire that keeps the materials clean so that the solder will flow out over the copper wire, and it will not be oxidized, and we'll have a nice clean connection. So you'll see me doing this a lot. I'm going to remind you a lot that this is the most important thing. Most people have difficulty making a good connection because their soldering iron is not clean. So the first thing I want to do is explain a little bit about wire. Not a lot, but we have stranded wire for our projects, and the stranded wire is very flexible, and it has a plastic insulation on it to keep it from making connections that you don't want it to. And we are going to need to remove some part of that insulation in order to make our connection. I'm going to recommend that you take about a ½ an inch off of the end of your insulated wire. This is 26 gauge wire. It comes in many, many gauges, ranging from 1/0 to about 30, and the smaller the number, the smaller the number, the larger the wire. So we're using 26 gauge, which is a fairly fine wire. And it is stranded, it is not solid. I'm going to locate the wire in a hole in my, there's a series of holes, different sizes, in my wire stripper. And I'm going to put my wire inside, and about a ½ an inch of that is exposed. And I'm going to pull on it, and I'm going to remove the insulation. And you should be able to see that the insulation has been removed here, and that's about a ½ an inch. And you'll notice that I twisted the wires. That's the first step, is that you twist this very vigorously so that you have a nice tight bundle of stranded wires. And while this part is flexible, the end of this, when we want to connect it to a switch, needs to be very rigid, because we're going to form a little hook when we do that in a few minutes. But the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to tin the wire. So we're going to use our third hand. We're going to place the wire in the jaws of this little alligator clip on our third hand. We're going to clean the tip of our soldering iron. I have bent this roll of wire. I've straightened it out and I bent it at a right angle because in many ways I feel like I can see it better and it works better. And I'm going to add a little drop of solder right to the end. And I'm going to put that drop at the end of my wire, and then I'm just going to drag the solder along the wire. I'm not really moving the soldering iron. I'm moving the solder. So it's very important that you move the solder. The soldering iron remains at the end of the wire. Move the solder along like so, and then that is called tinning the wire. And this is the very first step. This is now cool. This doesn't stay hot for very long, so the likelihood of you burning yourself is pretty minimal. Just give it a second or two and it will be cool.